good. So, good morning and welcome. I'm Teresa Shaver from the Business Advisory Center, Durham, and this is day 5 of Do It in Durham. Do It in Durham started 12 years ago. It was a opportunity to celebrate entrepreneurship. Is that you making those pictures over the screen?
Almost.
Okay, but
I'm
that
good.
oh yeah, it's your screensaver, right? Okay, good.
You'll
No,
see.
I'm a little gun shy. All right. We started 12 years ago creating Do It in Durham. It was a celebration of Global Entrepreneurship Week, which happens around the world in 200 countries. And this week has 40,000 events going on. So thankfully, Durham region had 70 of those. But it is about celebrating job creators, the innovators, people interested in business and entrepreneurship, finding opportunities to connect, to learn, succeed. Really, this is about what can you learn from here, and then what could you either put into your business or into your life as, education and content that you're getting. If we do nothing with this, then we've wasted that opportunity. So it's really an opportunity to connect with people, to learn, to grow yourself and your business. And I'm excited to have Russ and Mike Libbey here today from Your Bottom Line, or YBL Accounting, as their new branding says. I have worked with Ross, I don't know, probably 15 years now, and have met Mike as well, at least 10 years, I now say, and leaders in accounting, helping businesses, supporting businesses. And it's been a wonderful relationship, and I hope that continues to work with you. So, Mike, if you don't mind, I'll hand over to you and take it away. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Teresa. And thank you to the BACD and Do It in Durham Week. Always a fantastic time and some fantastic speakers and things going on. So it's a pleasure to be here. And today we want to talk about something that's, as far as we're concerned, quite timely. And in fact, we got some statistics to kind of back up that statement. And so it's something that's on top of a lot of people's minds lately with the aging baby boomers and the transition of business. And so it's not actually my screensaver, but it is potentially the dream and what people might be looking for, right? And so we actually, when you're talking about succession, we refer to it as the Tahiti test. And so what the Tahiti test is specifically is step backwards for a second and say, what would happen to your business if you were to go to Tahiti for 3 months, for 6 months, for a year without access to your phone, access to your email, access to anything at all? Who here could potentially do that and have their business run autonomously without them? I can't see any hands, but I imagine it's probably nobody. And so this is something that, like I said, is very timely and very important to understanding the way that you could potentially set your business up, whether it's for succession, whether it's for sale, whatever that might be. But the more that you can actually put behind your business in regards to the autonomy, as well as processes and educating people other than just yourself, the better you can set yourself up for success here. And so it can be daunting, it can be scary, and quite frankly, anxiety inducing in some cases to think about that end goal, right? Whether it's a year from now, a week from now, 10 years from now, it's something that you should be doing today to set your business up for succession, right? And so these are some staggering stats that are as of 2023. So the CFIB estimates that $2 trillion worth of business assets are going to change hands in the next decade. That is a lot of money to be passed down, to be passed sideways, to be passed somewhere. And so over 3/4 of Canadian small business owners plan to exit in the next decade as well. And so even on top of that, only 1 of 10 of these business owners currently have any kind of succession plan in place. So this is important to understand that, well, a lot of people have succession as a thought potentially in their mind. Are you really prepared for it? And what can you do to truly set yourself up personally as well as professionally to make sure that you are ready for that? So speaking of personally and professionally, it's important to understand that you're not only selling the business, right? Well, of course, whether it's an asset sale, share sale, whatever that might be, that is what's going to be sold. You need to emotionally get yourself ready for that as well. And that's very, very important. I know some of the acquisitions we've gone through or that we have on the radar, that's almost as important for some of these business owners to understand that, you know what, okay, sounds good. Here's X dollars on the table, but are you truly personally ready for that? So you've got to get focused. You've got to understand what's at hand here and what's at stake here. And importantly, you've got to build that transferable value. So what does that mean, right? You've got to enhance the independence of the business. You've got to develop key processes so that, I mean, you've heard people say work on the business versus in the business, but that becomes much more timely and much more important when you're down the line ready to potentially sell, hand off the keys to somebody else and make that happen, right? So the more that you are not a key player in your business from a fundamental standpoint, all the better. And that's where the independence in the processes come into place. You've got to align your strategic goals, right? So you've got to make sure that you've clarified your vision, your strategy, and set some objectives. What are you trying to achieve personally as well as professionally? And ultimately, plan the timing and team selection, right? You've got to do some long-term planning, you got to do some short-term planning, and of course, keep in the back of your mind almost at all times who are some potential leaders that could take over the next generation. So retiring in 5 years is not a succession plan. It might seem like it is for some people. I know I'm going to do this in 5 years. Sounds good. But you've really got to be ready. You've got to put steps in place. You've got to make sure that you've developed that timeline with milestones and tasks because you really can't plan. When that letter of intent, that LOI lands on your desk or your plate, that's not when you should be starting that planning, right? And again, whether it's on the roadmap 5 years from now, 5 weeks from now, you need to make sure that you're planning extremely early so you can control that narrative, right? And so that strong plan can enhance and build that business value. When you've optimized that business to, like I said, run almost autonomously, that's extremely important, especially if your goal is to try and get top dollar for that business. Plan for a 4 to 5 year process, right? Oftentimes we've seen it be longer than that. Oftentimes we've seen it be lower than that. But you've got to create that roadmap and be intentional and be proactive with everything you're trying to do. So you've got to evaluate and foster that accountability to make sure that you really are truly being intentional with the process. So today we're going to talk about 4 main topics. We're going to talk about the different exit pathways. We're going to talk about some tax efficiency measures. We're going to talk about maximizing the value of the business and, of course, how to effectively plan. So who am I? Well, I'm Mike Libbey, and so I'm the partner and COO at YBL. We've recently rebranded from a company named Your Bottom Line, so now we're known as YBL or YBL Accounting. I started young. Right after I started to walk, I started sorting receipts, so it's been in my blood since day one. Filed my first tax return at 17, and then stepped into leadership role within YBL around 2016. And now we can talk about kind of my succession story and how it's really brought me to where I am today. And so we'll be weaving my story into some tips, do's and don'ts, and things that you should be aware of in regards to the future. And so what really drives me is growing YBL sustainably and ensuring we've got that next generation of leaders, whether inside YBL or from a client perspective, helping entrepreneurs grow their businesses. So this is a fun one. So I know I've seen the show Succession. I'm not sure if anybody here has seen that show, but what I will say, do not use this as a template. This is almost what not to do. Whether you're talking about transitioning the business internally to your family or somewhere else, please do yourself a favor and do not take this as a playbook. So let's start with my story. So I had actually started with YBL in 2010, almost 15 years ago this year. And as much as I would love to say that in day one, I would like to take over my father's business, that really wasn't the plan. It really wasn't the intention. So for further context, my father started this firm 20 years ago in 2004. And so I joined him in 2010. Really, truly was not my plan to take over. And so I'd been progressing in responsibility, and it kind of dawned on me one day around 2018 that, you know what, I think it makes sense. I think this is, maybe it was his grand master plan. Ultimately, it really was not mine. And so when we'd start to have some informal conversations about the future and what that looked like, this was about 5 years out from when it really ended up transpiring. And so we were a team of about 12 at this point. Major decisions were really kind of being made by me too. So it just seemed like a natural fit to an extent. And so you have to remember that it was really just me and my dad who were working in his living room for much of these years, from 2010 to about 2017. And so I knew what we built had value. I knew and understood where we were trying to take the team. And so it was very important to me to make sure that we were setting this up for success and looking at the future. So for me, there was one path, but for anybody else here, there may be more than that, right? And so there are four main paths that you have to be aware of to understand from an outcome perspective what that may end up looking like. And so you've got the passer, the innie, the outie, and the squeezer, right? So in my situation, naturally, it ended up being the passer, right? So that's pretty straightforward, pretty obvious for most people, but that's transferring it to family, whether it's a son, a daughter, a cousin, a brother, whoever that might be. That's really what the passer is at its core. And so the innie is when you're selling that to internal employees. So a key employee, a key head of operations, a partner, something of that nature, passing that business down to somebody that's already within the organization. The outie, where you're selling the business to a third party, right? That could be anybody on the streets. That could be private equity. That could be somebody who's amalgamating businesses. That could be somebody else who just wants to start whatever that business might be, depending on whatever industry you're in. And then finally, you've got the squeezer, where effectively we've either run out of options or we want to do the most simplest answer, simplest option, where we're effectively just planning a liquidation of the business and the assets and kind of calling it a day. So let's dig into the passer, right? There's a few ways to pass this business. Arguably, this is the trickiest one, but it's also arguably the most rewarding one when done right. And so it's important to factor in siblings in some way as well, right? Will they care? Will they want a piece? You keep them in the loop constantly. And so ultimately, one thread that you'll hear me kind of weaving through this entire presentation is communication. Communication is really, really key. It's imperative to making sure that everybody's on the same page, whether that's between you, the successor, and the predecessor, or the entirety of the, let's say, family members that may or may not be involved. And so you've got legacy preservation, right? That's extremely important. For me, I know my son is only 5 years old, my daughter's only 1 year old, but I would love if I was able to pass this business down to them one day, right? That is something that's extremely rewarding. And so you get a little bit of control over that succession plan as well. Now, again, arguably no control at all if your children or whoever that might be decide to go into a completely other industry. But you have a little bit of control to have those open channels, those open doors to discussing that with said family member. It can arguably be cost effective as well, right? And so depending on the circumstances and depending on the transition plan, you may actually be able to just save a couple bucks by way of other potential fees. So what are some cons? So you've got potential family conflicts. So what is that? What are those discussions happening? Is somebody else going to have a little bit of animosity in regards to, hey, they sold the business to me and not them, or where's my cut in this, or how does that work, and how much have they brought to the table? So you got to be careful and cautious about that. And so preparedness of successor. So you don't want to force that square peg into a round hole, right? Is this individual, even if they're your son or your daughter, whoever that might be, are they really ready? Are they prepared to be your succession plan? Or is there an opportunity to properly prepare them? Or is there somebody internally that may be far better of a fit to actually lead this company? So that can get a little bit sticky, no doubt, depending on the circumstances. We were very fortunate, as far as I'm concerned. I might be biased as a successor here, but you got to be careful and cautious in that regard as well. And so another potential con could be, like I said before, it could be reduced sale value, right? Is the predecessor going for the highest buck? Is the successor trying to not bring down the value of the business, all jokes aside, but where do you meet in the middle on that? And how does that end up making sense? And so it really is something you need to make sure that you're extremely cautious about, especially when you're doing the passer and passing it internally. And so there is a joke where it says, once you've seen one family business, you've only seen one family business. All of them are wildly unique, and there's tons of variables in those. So be aware. And so now you've got the innie. So you've got the business continuity of that, right? If it's a key leader or a key stakeholder inside the company, an internal employee, they already understand the business. They can ensure a smooth transition and continuity there. Easy, straightforward, expected, right? It keeps that company culture alive when you're looking at it from that perspective. And it also motivates those employees, right? What ends up happening is that if you see a key employee moving up to being partner or being up to being owner, you see that there is a path to growth within that business. And so you want to be aware of the optics of all of this as well. And so having that motivation, that company culture, and being able to really allow somebody to flourish internally can reap dividends in a whole bunch of different ways from a trickle effect perspective. And so some cons can potentially be financial challenges, right? That key stakeholder, that key individual, maybe they're head of your operations or whatever role that they held within your company. Do they actually have the money to be able to finance or purchase this business? Now, that obviously depends on the size of the business and what's going on behind the scenes, but that could be something as well, right? And so that's also providing you a limited buyer pool, right? What ends up happening is now we just look at my company size, whether there's 3 people there, 300 people there, you're limiting that theoretically to whomever is under that roof of the organization. And so you got to understand that as well, right? If you can't really see it, the next question is, well, can you mold somebody? Can you train them? Can you educate them to being able to be ready for whatever that next step might be? And finally, management capabilities, right? So I've already kind of touched on education, but you need to make sure that these people are truly understanding of what you're trying to achieve here. What are your goals? What are your visions? And are they able to kind of take that on and run with that? And what's that plan look like? Is it a 3-year exit plan? Are you going to be educating them for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? How long do you plan on being there as well as the current owner? And so we've got the outie, right? The innie is if you're moving somebody up internally into that role. But what about the outie, right? So from the pro perspective, the financial return is theoretically maximized because now what you're doing, and we'll talk about this, but you're building the business value as much as you possibly can for resale to somebody out there at some point, whether you're using a broker, whether you're using a third party to help you sell that business. It's important to understand that especially when you're doing the outie, that can be quite beneficial to you to make sure you're maximizing that value and getting top dollar. And so another pro is arguably a clean break, right? And this is up to the way that you're potentially setting your business up to sell. Is it going to be a 1-year transition, 10-year transition? But you're able to keep that clean break and arguably have no ties to that. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'll leave that up to you, but you can have a clean break in these circumstances. And the broader pool of buyers, right? Arguably, it's limitless. Arguably, you could have anybody out there, like I said, whether you're going through a broker, whether it's a private sale, whether you're selling it to somebody else you know through a friend or family member, there may be increased bids, competitive bids, and valuations on that too. So a con or a drawback could potentially be the loss of control, right? If I do sell it to some, I'll say random third party, obviously you got to do your due diligence and understand who they are, what they stand for. But somebody else outside of your organization or family, you're going to have at some point loss of control. Now, again, that depends on how you set it up, but the owner may have little influence about what happens to the business post-sale, right? This can be challenging for those wanting to preserve the company's mission or especially those employees' jobs. So you got to make sure you're keeping the best interests of the company at heart and determining what's most important to you. This can be the most complex sales process, and that's from the standpoint of when you sell through a third party, you're going through lengthy negotiations, legal complexities, thorough due diligence process. You want to make sure that change management is handled accordingly. And so it's very important to understand that this by far and away can certainly be the most complex version of the sale process. And finally, culture misalignment, right? And so what that means is the new owner could effectively, when they take the reins, they could change the company's culture, which could significantly trickle through the company and lead to employee dissatisfaction. And so, like I said, it really depends on what's the highest priority. Are you going to keep a stake of that long term? Are you walking away? What's in those contracts? And what have you done during the due diligence phase and promised and legally signed over to that new individual? So finally, we got the squeezer. So this is also known as a planned liquidation where you're effectively controlling the exit and saying, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to close my doors. Whatever that ends up looking like, I'm going to keep that as a controlled exit. And so liquidation can allow the owner to gradually exit the business on their own terms, right? And that's where the control and the flexibility comes into place because it gives you the complete flexibility over the timeline and the pace of selling these assets and winding down the operations, right? To some people, it gives them serious peace of mind. You know what? Maybe I didn't get top dollar for this business, But I'm happy in knowing that I was able to get all my employees jobs elsewhere, maybe with competitors or other individuals, and you were happy to have the control over that flexible exit. So some potential drawbacks to that might be risk of lower returns, right? Depending on your industry, depending on what you're doing. If you're selling off your assets, maybe you're able to get top dollar for them, or maybe not. Depends how unique it is or how proprietary it might be. So the liquidation can often result in lower financial outcomes comparing to selling the business as a potential going concern. So you want to be aware of that as well. Negative perception is certainly something to be aware of too, right? The decision optically to wind down your business can optically really be seen as a failure by stakeholders, employee, or customers. Depends on, of course, your communication and delivery in regards to how that's being rolled out. But you got to be aware of the perception of that as well. And like I said, employee displacement. Well, you can do your best to help them try and get jobs somewhere else. Ultimately, they may lose their jobs gradually as the business shuts down, which can create legal challenges or even moral challenges in turn. So we obviously knew what we were going to be doing. So to come to the next part of our story, we were in 2020, we have much more of a serious conversation. And so we're both saying there's no real rush, right? Start taking it serious a little bit. We start talking to tax specialists and saying, you know what, this does make sense. This is going to happen at some point, but we're really not in any rush. And so it was very important that we started those conversations at that time, which is almost about 4 years ago now, talking to those serious specialists, whether you're talking about insurance specialists, corporate strategy specialists, tax specialists. You want to get as much specific advice as you possibly can. And in our case, you need some third-party opinions to make yourself a little bit more impartial, right? Everybody's got some thoughts on both sides, whether predecessor or successor, but you have to understand that you do want a little bit of third-party in the mix to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So the firm was doing very well, and so we were wondering, me, of course, I want to sabotage the business to try and pay the least amount of money for it. I kid, but ultimately that can be the case, right? I would never, ever do that, but you do want to understand that when you start talking to third-party specialists, you start getting more questions and answers. You wonder, how are you going to meet in the middle and make sure that whatever that succession cost is going to be is something that makes both of you happy and keeps everybody happy at the end of the day. So you start talking to pros, you start getting questions, you dig deep, and for us, it was really about doing it as efficiently as we could. And so that came to maximizing value, to understanding, okay, we know that at some point I'm going to be taking over the business, whether formally or perceptionally, whatever that ends up looking like. But how do you maximize the value of your business, right? And so you've got a lot of different factors that can help you maximize your business, from market position to brand value to scalability to the size, financial reporting and hygiene. So you'll hear it time and time again, but a business is only worth what somebody is willing to pay for it, right? So that sounds good, but what is the rough value? Get a valuation. Whether you're dealing with a valuation specialist, whether you're just wondering out of curiosity, whatever you're thinking, if this is on your horizon, do it sooner than later, because the last thing you want to do is get a business valuation at the back end when you're ready to sell, whether it's a Passer, any Audi, whatever that might be, and you say, oh my goodness, this is not worth what I thought it might be. And so there are some serious things that you can do to your business to certainly optimize it to make sure that you get top value for that, right? Financial reporting is an easy one. As an accountant, understandably, keep the business up to date from a compliance perspective, making sure you're running it as efficiently as you possibly can, whether that's operationally or financially. And so what does it look like? What's behind the brand value? Is there room to grow here? From a scalability perspective, have I set these processes up from a standardized perspective to make sure that whoever comes in is going to be able to just take the reins and run with it? You want to make sure that that transition is truly as smooth and seamless as you can possibly make it. And so by factoring in all of these things, you want to make sure that you've really set up that value as best you can from a transition standpoint. And so management team is another crucial one as well. When somebody comes in, whether they come in right at the top from a succession standpoint, you want to make sure you've got the people under them that are ready to help them take the reins and make that transition as smooth, as seamless as possible. So education is truly a big piece in that too. So I've already mentioned operational independence. A well-documented business, quite frankly, runs much smoother. And so processes and strategy need to be on paper, need to be in your systems, need to be wherever you are. The more that you can have somebody come in completely out of nowhere, whether at a lower level or at the highest possible level, the more autonomous this business can run, the more it's going to be worth, and the more that you're going to be able to make sure that that independence is truly there. And so, from a financial health and resilience standpoint, the same thing, right? Is the business profitable? Are we trending that it's becoming more profitable? How are we making sure that we've maximized this value here to ensure that you've got that financial health and future proofness ready for you? And so, if you invest in technology, which we certainly have, and that's one of our key differentiators here at YBL, that can help you too. So, if you're investing regularly in technology upgrades, whether that's from a client facing perspective or internally from an efficiency perspective, that can certainly help maximize your value. So, that's something to think of too. And the Tahiti test. So, I started by mentioning, could you leave and head to Tahiti for 3 months, for 6 months? Is that possible? And if it's not, that may be something that you want to think of for the future to be able to ensure that when that transition does happen, all the simpler. Leadership development, right? This is another key one too, wherein you've got those people, or you may be looking for those people, whether it's operations manager, whether it's a COO, whether it's head of whatever department, depending on your industry, you want to make sure you're investing in their development to ensure that they can handle many more pieces of your business. A lot of people get stuck in our ways and thinking that only I can do this because only I know it. Well, that's true, only you know it today, right? And so if you start writing that down, whatever you're doing and whatever logic you're going through, we use a lot of videos, right? If I'm going through a proposal, going through this, I'm going to screen share with myself, record a video, send that off, let that live, ensure that I've got AI taking notes, doing whatever that might be. And so that development is crucial. So client and brand loyalty, right? Do you have loyal clients? Do you have recurring clients who are coming on board on a regular basis or monthly recurring revenue? That's always going to be attractive from an investment standpoint. And what is the brand loyalty, right? Do you have a following or a serious following, and there's actual value behind that name, whatever that name might be and whatever your industry might be? And finally, you've got some potential macroeconomic influence, right? So that depends on market demand, buyer confidence, access to capital. We all know what happened just a few years ago, but you never know, right? With interest rates high or low, or potential access to funding, that's important to understand that there might be some key things that are out of your hands. And so the next phase for us was in 2022. We determined after all of our conversations that, okay, you know what, it makes sense. Here's what we're looking for. We have a lot of questions, a lot of answers we've come up with, but there was one thing that kept ringing true on both of our sides that was of the utmost importance to both of us, and that was tax efficiency. How do we do this in the most tax efficient manner to ensure that, well, me as a successor, I'm not paying a ton of taxes or money, and Ross as the predecessor, same thing. How is he going to save the most amount of taxes on this transition? And especially in our case, we're very lucky and fortunate. There was no serious rush. We were able to say, you know what, here's what we think. And so, unfortunately, what ended up happening was that, fortunately, was that the AMT rules, the alternative minimum tax rules, were changing. And so we were actually put on the clock. And so we were humming and hawing for quite some time. So we knew what we wanted to do, but we really had a fire lit under us when those tax laws were going to be changing. And so tax efficiency was still the highest order of the day, but we were put on the clock a little bit to ensure that everything was done by the end of 2023. And so those other external influences in regards to those potential tax changes coming down the line from the government are extremely crucial to understand as well. So, like I said, how do you take a look at it from a tax efficiency perspective? So we knew what we wanted to do, but how does that impact you, and what should you factor in? So I mentioned it already, which we certainly did. Now, from our background, accounting, tax, advisory, we had a little bit of an edge in this regard, so it very much depends on who you are and what you do. But that didn't matter. We wanted to consult somebody who did this all day, every day, right? It's very important. You don't want a generalist. In these cases, you want a specialist. You're dealing with a lot of money, a lot of energy, effort, and emotion in this. you need to make sure you're looking at the facts. And so there really is no one size fits all. Whether you're talking about planning for the tax efficiency from an estate planning perspective, transaction structuring perspective, leveraging tax reliefs, making sure your tax obligations are up to date and filed and ready to transfer. Because put it this way, we do unfortunately see a lot of people who haven't filed their taxes for 2 years, 10 years, 22 years is their record. And so if you're going to sell your business, you can't do that if your tax information is not up to date. Or you can potentially do that, but the buyer doesn't necessarily know what they're walking into, and you might get a considerably reduced value for that business. So take a look at your financial obligations, certainly your CRA obligations, and make sure that you're planning for those most tax efficient exit options, right? Should you be looking at something like a charitable trust, some donations, employee stock ownership plans? There can be a lot of complex details into this. And it really depends on the sale process, right? Am I buying it out today for $500,000, $10 million, whatever that might be? Or is this going to be an installment sale where you may be able to take advantage of some reserves and trickle that capital gain out over a certain amount of years? So the tax efficiency is a very, very important one on both sides to be factoring in. So here are just some general kind of business tax rates, right? I'm going to dig into the lifetime capital gains exemption shortly, but that's a very, very big one. So with a qualifying corporation, on the first $1.25 million of the sale price, as long as you're selling the shares, asterisks on that because you have to be careful about ensuring that you're selling it properly to qualify. But you can sell that first $1.25 million tax-free, 0% tax. So when we're talking about maximizing business value, we also want to maximize business efficiency in the tax aspect of it as well. And so I'm certainly going to dig into this for you guys so you can understand some of the ways to ensure that you set your business up to qualify for that. Otherwise, you may be looking at the capital gains rate, depending on the sale or the transfer or how that moves hands, at about 27%. And then when you take those funds out personally, they may be taxed at 39 or 48%. So you really want to structure this accordingly. How are you going to extract those funds? Are you looking at estate freezes, capital gains, maybe a capital loss? Did you buy this business and now you're selling it again? You don't know how this is going to kind of all filter through and how much money is going to change hands until you've run that analysis. So I said that the first 1.25 million on a qualifying corporation can qualify for the LCGE. So how do we make sure we qualify? Well, there's something called purifying a corporation, right? You've got to optimize the business as much as you can to ensure that you meet some of these limits. There are a couple different rules in regards to ensuring that you meet a 24-month, 50% asset test for the LCGE. Are there too much funds in there? Right? We've seen this time and time again that there's too many assets that aren't necessarily being utilized in business operations, and so you don't qualify. But do you have $1 million of corporate investments in there? That may push you off board. So purifying the corporation, whether that's from an estate freeze perspective, whether that's just from a higher level structuring perspective, is important. And can you optimize for LCGE multiplication? Right? Is there two owners that own the business or two shareholders that run the business? Maybe they can both qualify separately for that 1.25 million. Have I just bought both of them out? How can I structure that, or how can they structure that to ensure that they're able to potentially multiply that as well? So that all factors into the purification as well as the kind of corporate structure in regards to selling that, to making sure, because you can save hundreds of thousands of dollars. Put it this way, if you save $300,000 for one LCGE, if you've got multiple shareholders, you can easily save upwards of $1 million, depending on how this kind of transfers and trickles out to that next set of hands. Very much depends on the structure, very much depends on how many owners are in that business, and if it's a qualifying corporation, or if you can set it up to be a qualifying corporation. So you want to organize and review your due diligence documents. Whether you're going through that sale today or in 5 years, you want to make sure that you're almost treating your business to be ready for sale. And like I said, that just really helps optimize the efficiency of the business to ensure that, okay, well, maybe somebody's not buying it tomorrow, but what are some questions they're going to ask me so I can be ready for that, right? Do I have all of my engagements ready? Do I have all of my financials up to date? Do I have all of my processes noted? And whether you're selling it or not, quite frankly, it just helps you from a business hygiene perspective to ensure that you've got your business set up as efficiently as you can. And whether that's for you or whether that's for all of your team members, if you've got any, that's imperative to ensuring that you've really set it up properly. And so, like I said before, identify and take care of any tax deficiencies or non-compliance. So, I mean, in short, make sure your taxes are up to date. Make sure your liabilities are taken care of. Make sure there's no monies owing to CRA. And so you've got a couple different sale options, whether it's an asset sale, a hybrid sale, a share sale, and we'll run through some of the pros and cons of those as well. So something new that is actually proposed in Canada is called the Entrepreneur's Incentive. And so what that is this is actually above and beyond the LCGE, which is fantastic, but it's tax relief for founding investors in the business. So if you're a founding investor in the business and you've held more than 10% of the shares for at least 5 years before the sale transaction takes place, you may be able to qualify for an additional $200,000 of effectively an LCGE reduction. So on that additional $200,000 in year one, you will not pay any taxes if you qualify, but it's at a reduced rate. So with the LCGE, you pay no taxes on that 1.25 million. With the entrepreneur's incentive, you're going to pay capital gains at a lower tax rate than you normally would on regular capital gains. So each year after 2024, that entrepreneur's incentive is going to be increasing by $200,000 up to $2 million by 2034. So if you sell it in 2034, that $2 million that you may sell your business for is going to be taxed at a much lower rate than it would be without the entrepreneur's incentive. And so you can combine this, like I said, with the LCGE, which is quite fantastic. It'll considerably reduce your potential tax liability. So what are some of the sale planning options? So like I said before, you've really got your standard asset sale, and then you've got your share sale. Now you can do a hybrid. You've seen that in the previous slides there, but these are the most common too. And so with an asset sale, it's a bit of a selective purchase, right? And so what that means is if I'm going to sell YBL, are they buying the name? Are they buying the logo? Are they buying the website? Are they buying the assets, aka the clients? Are they buying my team members? What pieces of this business are they going to be purchasing? And so it's a bit of a selective purchase. And so another piece of good news, certainly for the buyer, is that they're not actually going to be inheriting the liabilities of the corporation. So if I owe debt within YBL, whether it's on a loan or a liability or the CRA, if somebody buys my business, but they only buy an asset sale, they're not necessarily incurring that liability because maybe they've only bought a block of business or clients. So from a buyer perspective, it is certainly beneficial. And so what are some cons? So as the seller, it's certainly going to be higher tax because with the LCGE, you only qualify for that if it's a share sale. So if I'm selling only parts of my business as an asset, I'm not actually qualifying as a seller for that LCGE, so that considerable tax gain. So there can be indirect tax as well if I own maybe commercial real estate or any sort of property inside of my corporation or my business. There may be some property transfer taxes and things to be aware of there. And it can be very nuanced negotiations. And what I mean by that is, okay, great, we're going to buy an asset or buy assets of this business. Well, what exact assets and how much for each of those assets? And so there's complex kind of negotiations in that by way of saying, okay, well, I want to buy this one for that or this one for that. So there's multiple negotiations going on when you're purchasing the assets. And so now if you look at the share sale side, of course, and I've kind of talked about it quite a few times here with the LCGE, that's extremely important. It's not something to gloss over. It can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. So to set your business up, lock, stock, and barrel to sell it as a share or sell the shares of that business, that can be much, much more beneficial from a seller perspective. It's arguably simple, right? You see the quotes there. And what we mean by simple is there's no negotiations or discussions in regards to what you're potentially buying. Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? No, it's everything, for better or worse. You're getting all of the pieces, the assets, the income, the expenses, liabilities. Everything is yours. Congratulations. And so from a drawback or a cons perspective, you may have some increased liability. right? There may be some debt there. There may be some things you find out, unfortunately, the hard way, which you certainly, knock on wood, hope you don't. But there may be some things that you weren't necessarily aware of that are inside of that corporation or that business that you just purchased. And so there can be increased liability. And so, of course, you've got to do more due diligence, right? If I'm buying an asset, whether that's a block of clients and I'm paying on retention, or whether I'm buying a piece of equipment, more due diligence is certainly required because you're buying absolutely every piece of this corporation, like I said, for better or worse. So you want to do significant due diligence in ensuring that what you're purchasing is exactly what you were expecting. And so you can get into a complex valuation as well, right? And so because you're not just buying individual assets, you're buying everything, you want to get into the nitty gritty, into the weeds, and understanding every little facet of this business and ensuring that, you know what, I am comfortable in purchasing this. So for us, we got the tax efficiencies in place. We got the estate freezes in place. We ensured that we were looking to qualify for the LCGE, corporate structure, everything is all set up, ready to rock and roll. And so what ends up happening is the emotion kicks in, right? And so I've talked about emotion quite a bit here. And so everybody was comfortable. Communication was there nonstop. Everybody knew what they wanted to do. But emotion is always going to be there, whether it's a passer from a family member to another one, whether you're selling it to a third party. There's a lot of emotion attached to this, right? I've built this. This is my baby. Whether I've created this and have set it up to sell or not, there is always going to be a little bit of emotion that's attached to this. So I would highly suggest for a lot of people, you go through those emotions as early as you possibly can. Now, easier said than done. And like I said, I know with some of the acquisitions we've gone through, the other parties that we may be acquiring certainly have a lot of emotion attached to that. So we're always well aware. And that's where the communication comes into place. And so what changes, right? We've signed on the dotted line at the end of 2023. Does anything change? Does it matter? Is it formality behind the scenes that we knew was going to be transpiring at some point or another? He's not going anywhere, and we're very fortunate for that. And so my case is unique, right? I said once you've seen one family business, you've only seen one family business. They're going to be wildly different. And so he's not going anywhere. We're very thankful for that. He can work wherever he wants anyways because of the way we've set up this business. So he's not going to Tahiti, and if he is, he's going there to work. But like I said, it's a different situation. It's a different story. And so we're very fortunate the way that it all kind of panned out from a tax perspective and ensuring that everybody was happy as far as we're both concerned. So what were some of our key takeaways, right? You want to consult those specialists early. Very, very early, because like I said, you're going to get more questions than you are answers out of that. And that's good because it opens that door to communication that you might not have thought you needed to have. No one size fits all approach, right? This stuff is wildly, wildly unique. As much as it seems cookie cutter, and a lot of pieces of it will be, you cannot just factor in everything. And that's why you have to talk to these specialists. There can be timing challenges. There can be urgency from a pros and cons perspective. If you aren't set up to kind of sell your business, that's where the urgency comes into place. And so you rush and you may forget things during that transition. You got to focus on what matters, right? Don't overthink the ownership, because if you've got somebody, whether that's an innie or whether that's a passer, CRA might not care. If they were not a shareholder, it's arguably irrelevant what value they brought to that business. And so the biggest lessons learned were certainly to start planning early and to develop a clear plan. And so what are, just generically speaking, some other effective succession steps that you should be taking place? So like I said before, we want to make sure you've got that clear vision and objectives. What's going to keep you happy personally and professionally? How do we make sure that whatever this exit looks like, whatever this transition looks like, you've ensured that you're comfortable, the predecessor's comfortable, and this makes sense on all sides? And so you want to make sure that you're identifying those potential successors far earlier than you think, right? You ask my dad in this case, he's going to say, you know what, I obviously had that in my mind from years prior. So you want to make sure that whether it's an innie or a passer or somebody out there, you've got some feelers out there if it's something that's going to be on the horizon in 5 years. And that's where that timeline and milestones come into place from a development and training internally, as well as that communication aspect as well. So that vision, you align those personal and business goals, short-term and long-term goals, right? And one of those goals, quite frankly, from a desired legacy perspective, may be that I actually want to stay here for 10 years, for 20 years, whatever that might be. While I might have my hands off the wheel a little bit, I may absolutely still want to be here. And so that could be a good thing and that can be a bad thing, right? Depending on the circumstances in other kind of businesses, they may end up overstaying their welcome and they may end up stepping on your toes. Well, you may have ended up purchasing this business. What can end up happening is if that prior owner, especially if it might be an Audi, if they're still there for a very long time, they might not let you be able to kind of unleash the potential that you may be able to for the business. So that person who's purchasing the business or that you're assessing the skills and competencies of the individuals, right? Whether that's an innie, whether it's an outie, whoever that is, you want to make sure that you're considering multiple candidates. A little bit different if it's a passer, perhaps, but you want to make sure that you're considering as many people as you can, especially if you're doing an outie, to make sure that you're getting top value, but arguably more importantly, somebody who's really going to fit that culture and leadership style. The last thing you want is to have somebody who's simply coming there and saying, you know what, sounds good, I've got top dollar, but they don't necessarily fit that culture properly. So you definitely want to keep that into consideration. And internal versus external, right? Even if it's 10 years away, you're thinking about having a succession plan. If you see a key to be able to make sure that that person might have the professional development skills to be able to go up into that role, it's something you definitely want to factor in. So what are the milestones and what does that timeline really look like? So you want to develop that detailed schedule and you want to develop each phase, right? You want to include the timeline, contingencies, and you want to expect the unexpected, right? As you start talking to these specialists, they're going to have some questions and some thoughts for you that you had absolutely no idea about. So it is imperative that, like I said, you have these conversations, you certainly see what's out there, and you define those critical objectives like completing development programs, finalizing legal documents, and achieving financial targets. So that's where you're going to set those goals as well. Long term, of course, but don't forget about those short term ones. Whether you're identifying potential successors or whatever that might be, optimization of the business is imperative. So do really understand that there will be bumps, and that's okay. But as long as you prepare for it and you do your due diligence on both sides, when it's done, it will all be worth it. And so as long as you've prepared properly, like I said, you can really, really reap dividends here. So some final thoughts. So from what we learned, from what you need to learn or you need to potentially understand, a lot of emotion here, right? You need to communicate. You have to address all of these concerns and feedback. We will always say in any acquisition we're going through, whether internally or to third parties, leave nothing on the table, right? If you're having second thoughts, let the person know, whether that's an innie, an outie, and you're addressing those concerns. You got to communicate with people early. You got to maintain transparency throughout the process. It's imperative. It really, really is. And manage those expectations, right? I already said kind of expect the unexpected. You've got to be able to roll with the punches and understand that things can arise during these transition periods. And you always have to be able to reassess those goals, right? I know we're regularly reassess those and say, you know what, things changed. Facts have changed. Maybe this has become the highest priority for me or for my business. With regular reviews intact and regular updates on those succession plans. So communicate, engage advisors early, ensure tax efficiency, assuming that is one of the highest orders of the day. Do your best to maximize the value, and of course you want to minimize those risks. Plan early. Even 10 years out from now, you want to just not necessarily have the person in mind. Got to do that. So optimize optimize this business to have them. Thank you so much for everybody coming today, and look forward to having some further conversations.